Things are not going to be normal again in our lifetimes, but we're in this awkward phase where the system and mainstream society has not yet changed over to that fact, whereas more and more people are privately or silently waking up to that, and a lot of them are doing things differently or giving up. And there's really an epidemic of that, except it's not really an epidemic, in the sense that it's a problem to be solved. It's just becoming the new reality that people are acknowledging, at least to themselves, and acting accordingly. I know a few things I read about are the loneliness epidemic and men dropping out of the labor force and very low. I think it's the lowest labor participation rate since maybe the 70s or 60s. But there are still a lot of normies out there who they go to their 9 to 5, they have a big fat cushy pension coming and a good benefits package and all of this stuff that most of us don't have and probably will never have at this point. And those people are just, they might as well be living on a different planet. They are very detached from the reality that most people live. And these do tend to be middle-aged or older, and a lot of them are around retirement age or they're going to retire soon, and they just don't really understand the real struggle. They may logically know it because it is getting harder and harder to avoid those perspectives, especially if you spend any time online. But personally, they just can't really internalize it, because if it's going well for them, then things are going well, and that's really the be-all end-all of the story. Anyway, I was reminded of an old green text post that I'm pretty sure it preceded the all the 2020 stuff. And basically the post said that collapse does not look like what most people think it looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not exciting. It's not energetic. It's usually the opposite. I'll see if I can find it and put it up in this video. But basically, what collapse really looks like, if you're living through it, is people are unemployed more often. They don't have stability. They can't build lives and futures. They can't get married. They can't have children. They can't do the things that not so long ago used to just be considered normal. They might not even be able to come up with $100 for an unexpected expense. And so that is what collapse really looks like if you're living through it. It's just very dreary, it's very boring, it's very much a slog. It's just like wading through the mud and you don't see any hope of getting out of the swamp. And I was thinking about all of this, and I'm not even sure at this point if, let's say, the old American dream kind of life became widely accessible to people again. I'm not sure a lot of people would even want to partake of it at this point. People are just really tired, and, things that, they might have still been interested in maybe 5 or 10 years ago, they're just not, they're not interested, or not in the same way. They're just tired. It's like people say, they're tired in a way that sleep won't fix. And, eventually, if the dog just keeps being kicked again and again, eventually the dog quits coming when it's called. That's the nature of people. We want to do things. We want to make friends. We want to have families. We want to have stable jobs so that we can build stable lives and stable futures. We want to own homes. We want to have a community. We want to have those social bonds that just make life so rich and meaningful. But eventually, if you don't get those things, or you don't have those things, you can't really build those things, and they just go off the menu entirely, so to speak, then I think eventually you just get tired of dealing with it. You get tired of thinking about it. And you hit that point where you you're not happy, and you know you're not happy, but you're a functional, well, you're a functional melancholic. Hey, that's a very good YouTube channel, by the way. You should go check out that guy, the functional melancholic. But yeah, you become a functional depressive, and you physically do the things you need to do in a lot of cases. Now, some people can hit a depressive state and they just can't get out of bed. They start neglecting their health and their hygiene. They might gain a lot of weight because they just eat junk food just to feel something, or they might stop eating as much because they're just so disengaged from life. A lot of them become hermits, and just any social interaction after a point just becomes too much. So, it can take many forms, but I think a lot of people, maybe even most of them who are like this, they are functional depressives, and they can work a job if they're fortunate enough to have one and be able to keep one. They can drive their car and run errands, and they can probably pay their bills, and just they can go through the motions of day-to-day life, and it's that part is fine. But they've gotten to a point where they just have no desire or energy or any inclination to try to socialize. Not that there's anywhere to go socialize with or anyone to go socialize with. They're done with dating sites and dating apps, or some stuff like that, because they're just basically algorithmic prisons that are trying to maximize your time on the app and not help you meet someone to form a real relationship with. And of course, there's nowhere to really go out and socialize, so you're not going to meet anyone that way. And you probably have long lost friends who you haven't called in maybe a year or two, and they haven't called you, and you haven't dropped the friendship. You just, not much has changed in the last year or two. And you get busy, and they're busy, and sometimes it's just hard to talk. And there's no movies to go out and see in the movie theater because they're all just garbage. And if you want to even just buy a video game, if you still game, you can't even get a physical video game anymore. I mean, you can, but it's getting to the point where new stuff is just going to be digital only. And so basically, if you looked at it just on paper, it might look like we have all of the same things we had 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, the same things that people had 40 and 50 years ago. But the stark reality is that pretty much all of that has changed, and not for the better. It's changed much for the worse. And so in theory, in 2026, you can go out and socialize, you can go catch a movie, you can go on a date, you can apply for jobs, go on job interviews, which of course are humiliation rituals at this point. I mean, that's just what they are. But that's the thing. Everything is a humiliation ritual, and that's what's different. At one time, I mean, look, rejections or failures, this has always been part of life. But the old game was that, you're not guaranteed to succeed at everything, but if you work hard and you play by the rules and you're a good citizen and you do what you're supposed to do, then you're going to get your breaks in life. And it's not just going to be one lucky break that you had no control over. Your way of living and your behavior and your choices did actually add up and lead to some of those breakthroughs. Whereas now you can do all of the right things. You finish high school, you get good grades, you go to college, you get good grades, you graduate, you apply to 1,000 jobs, and it's hard to get interviews. And you download a dating app and you swipe right on everybody on there, and you get one match, and it's an AI profile, and you look for a hobby group in your area to meet people with common interest, but it's only there's like 3 people and they're all age 70. Meanwhile you're 26, and you just wonder, like, where are all the people my age, things like that. So on paper it's still there. You could still join what is it called, like the Lions Club or the Rotary Club, or some like volunteering or groups or clubs or whatever. But it's just, and again, no, there's no problem with older people. It's just if you're 25, you're probably not going to want to socialize mostly with 75-year-olds because you're looking for peers. You're looking for people your own age, and you're looking for um, people to date who are your own age, and things like that. So, on paper, it's all there. You can still, tick the boxes and try to do all the stuff, but it's just not like it used to be. And the options that are there in theory are not there in real life. And hey, look, older people are suffering the loneliness epidemic too. And, I'm not even sure that's anything new per se, but I mean, I'm sure just like seemingly everything else that's socially based, it's worse than it used to be. But I mean, I'll tell you a story. So recently, I went out to a restaurant, and this guy comes in. I mean, he looks like he's probably at least 350 pounds, and the guy's kind of limping. He's not getting around very well. His legs are huge. Very obese and everything. And I was just sitting at the back of the restaurant, but he starts talking to this woman who's with her family, like a couple tables away. And I mean, he just talked about everything. I mean, he talked about that his wife had passed away, and he was talking about how his kids, or like he doesn't get to see his kids a whole lot, and they're grown, of course. He looked like he was maybe around 70, not exactly sure. He mentioned that he needed to get, he was waiting on something to approve his double knee surgery. And so it's like it clicked to me like this guy has a lot of stuff on his mind. He's very lonely. He's worried about a lot of stuff. And, it's just obvious to me that this guy was so lonely and felt so cut off that all he could do was go to, some fast food joint and start chatting up random strangers and just laying his life story on them. And I could tell it was that because he didn't just talk to this woman and her family while they were standing in line waiting or, waiting to get their food. It wasn't that. They had gotten their food. They had all sat down. They were eating. And this guy just carried on the conversation the entire time. And, I think a lot of people would look at that and say, oh, that guy was just being rude. And I was thinking like, no, I see, I can read between the lines pretty easily. I know exactly what this is. I'm seeing the loneliness epidemic play out right in front of my eyes and ears. So, I mean, old people suffer this too, but, I guess one thing I could say is that most of them probably got to live their younger lives and maybe their middle age in times where things did feel much more normal, and, normal things could just happen and they weren't just blocked or absent at every turn in your life. But man, it's everywhere. I mean, it's in just about everybody. This deep sense of loneliness and foreboding and despondency. I mean, you stop in a little store to, pick up, milk and bread or whatever, and the retail workers just look so defeated. And I mean, a big part of that, of course, is if you're stuck in a job that's not paying your bills really well, your paycheck to paycheck, or there's just no future in it, and maybe even struggle to get that job. I mean, yeah, that's one reason, but a lot of it too is that I would think a lot of these people, and I've been there before myself, probably the main social interaction they ever have is at work, dealing with coworkers and customers who are, a lot of times it's fine, but a lot of times it's not fine, and a lot of people are just not very pleasant to deal with. But and we kind of take stuff like that for granted. We don't really think anything of it. But it really was only about 3 or 4 generations ago. I mean, I guess even still, like back in the 60s or 50s, you could have a retail job, and it would be it could be a single family income back then. You could go work at, whatever was Walmart in the 1950s, and you could buy a home, and you could get married, and you could have 2 or 3 kids, or maybe 4. You could have a family car. You could take a week vacation with your family once a year. And that's how the system used to be set up, was that stuff was normal once upon a time. And I know it hasn't always been like that. I know a lot of it has come out of, the post World War II order. But, it's just like we all let that stuff go, and, nobody really said much. I mean, I guess these things happen slow enough that the average person just doesn't really perceive them going away. I mean, I could talk all day about things that are worse now than when I was a kid. I mean, even something as simple as going to a fast food place is a much worse experience. It's much more expensive than it was even, pre 2020. But, also clearly the ingredients are worse. I mean, I try to cook more at home nowadays because there's just so much stuff out there in restaurants and fast food places that it doesn't taste like food anymore. It just tastes like chemicals. I mean, I could probably just make a video talking about different junk food or fast food items or restaurant items, and like talk about the chemical taste, the last time I had them. I mean, it's just that palpable these days. And I mean, so yeah, it's better to go to the grocery store and, buy real food, real ingredients where, there's two or three ingredients listed and you all know what they are. Of course, even that, is not cheap anymore. You're not, it's like it's going to take you a lot of time, but, you go and buy real, whole, natural, actual food, and it's $100 for a small sack of groceries or something. And it's just, everything is getting out of hand. And I guess this is really the essence of the problem, is there doesn't really seem to be much of anything that's reasonable anymore. For a long time, there were always places in society for people who couldn't be high achievers, who just couldn't get above a certain point, maybe who, didn't go to college, or, just didn't care about the school and the academics that much, or just, couldn't do the regular 9 to 5 thing. And there were always places for them to go and jobs for them to do and places for them to rent. But it just seems like all of that stuff has disappeared. If you're not in the top 10%, then you're in the bottom 90%, and that's a monolithic group, or it seems to be getting to that point. I mean, look, if you get on the internet, this stuff can be sensationalized a lot more, but kind of like I said earlier in the video, actually living through a slow motion collapse, which is what I think we're doing, it's all there. It's just that in your day-to-day life, it's not going to be sensationalized. It's just going to be in the background. And unless you know how to look for it and what to look for and how to read between the lines, you may never realize it's there. And I think a lot of people whose lives are going great and they have everything they need, they don't see it. They interpret things a certain way that's really not accurate. They may go to McDonald's and, maybe it's an upper middle class person. Maybe they're making $150,000 a year and they've got a stay-at-home wife and 3 kids. And, when the McDonald's employee just doesn't give them the biggest smile ever and, maybe just seems downright unhappy, they'll be very harsh about it and say, God, that person should be happy to have a job. And it's like, that job probably doesn't, probably barely pays for your gas to get there. It's just, it's very easy to be harsh sometimes when you're not accustomed to being on the other side of things, and you come up for reasons why they, must be bad people or lazy or just whatever. But anyway, I guess that would be my final thing to talk about in this video, is the general level of decency and compassion and mercy and empathy and conscientiousness. These things have declined greatly. And, I think part of it is people being in survival mode, and part of it is there are people who are just detached from what it's really like for most people. And, the technology, all the screen-based technology and short form social media content is definitely harming I really believe that it's harming people's minds. If you swipe through, 200 TikToks or, 250 Instagram reels in a day, you're basically desensitizing your mind to anything that could appear interesting, and nothing in real life can compete with that. But it's I mean, declining attention spans and sort of ability to think and focus have been talked about to death. But I think one that doesn't get mentioned nearly enough is that when you do that to your mind, you're also blunting your emotions severely. And it's like we have a whole generation now, this generation alpha, who they appear to have a kind of brain damage, and they can't even feel emotions the same way that, say, most of us could when we were kids. And when they do have emotions, they don't have any emotional regulation. And a lot of this is parenting too. That's probably actually the bigger thing is, hey, I'm a millennial myself, so I'll just say it. Millennial parents are, a lot of times, they're not very good. If you're a millennial parent and you're raising your kids well, I'm not talking about you, but there are a lot of millennial parents, and they're the ones raising Gen Alpha now, quote unquote raising. But if you're just letting your kid become an iPad kid, then you're just letting them go. I mean, you're just basically saying, well, you know what, I have a kid, but I'm not going to be a parent, and I'm not even going to try. And you're letting your kid just become society's future problem. And I know parents and everybody else, they're tired, they're exhausted. In most cases, they're also training their brains to, do short form content and just basically destroy their mental and emotional faculties. So, if the parents are doing it, the kids don't have any chance. It's not even their fault. They don't even, they're not able to even understand this stuff, but the parents should be a lot more critical about it. I always thought it was funny growing up in the 90s that there was a panic over, video games that had, fighting moves or pixelated blood. And, the screen time conversation was being had back then too. It just seems so quaint and cute now because screen time has just taken over so many people's lives. Whereas before, it might be 2 to 4 hours a day in front of the TV or video games. And I'm not saying that was really good either. I mean, I could make arguments about why, say, video games in the 90s were actually not that bad for kids' minds. But I mean, still, regardless of what time you're living in, real life should be the main thing you're experiencing more than anything that's mediated through a screen. Or, I mean, you know what? If someone was doing nothing but reading books, I mean, they should still go outside. They should still socialize. They should still make friends and, all of this stuff. I mean, I'm assuming the word bookworm, was originally probably meant as an insult, right? So all I'm really saying is that a balanced life is what we need, and that's just one of the many things that's been lost. But anyway, that's yeah. I know I covered the gamut here, but yeah, I mean, I think when everything feels like a humiliation ritual, that's a sign that you're living through the collapse or at least the decline of your society. And when even, basic socialization or emotional or intellectual depth are just very dulled or even absent, that's a big sign. When things that should be normal parts of life become just so out of reach for so much of the population, that's a massive sign. It's not that nobody wants to work, but a lot of people would love to work if only they could get a stable job that will pay the bills and let them have a little bit left over, at the end of the month to save and put towards building a future. Um, but like I said, we might be at a point now where a lot of people, even if they were offered that option realistically, they might just say, nope, I'm done. I've spent the last, decade or 20 years even, trying to build my life and I couldn't. So, why would I even try to change anything at this point? It's just not looking good out there. But anyway, thanks for listening to this video, and please like and share and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. It'll help me grow my channel and expand things. Please check me out on Ko-Fi as well. I'm there. I have one ebook up on Ko-Fi right now. It's actually about playing the job search game better. So I hope you'll check that out. I think you'll find some value in it. I'm really trying to keep this channel and the things that I'm working on more realistic and not, I'm never gonna get on here and say, oh, buy my $3,000 course, bro. I'm never gonna do that. I do want to create more and more things over time that are just realistic about where we are, but also things that can just help them with basic, simple things in their day-to-day life and just make things a little better, or, make it a little easier to deal with things once you step outside your front door. So yeah, I'm never gonna be a grifter type. I'm never gonna tell you to buy my $3,000 course, or that, just book a $250 an hour coaching call with me and I'll solve your problems. But I'm just trying to keep it small and reasonable and realistic and just completely true to life, and not exaggerate anything. As you can tell, I don't exactly talk about a lot of happy things on this channel most of the time. But yeah, that's about it. Thanks for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video.